Conventional medical wisdom writes off Courtenay Heading as an obsessive anti-vaccination conspiracy theorist, and having read or watched hours worth of articles and links he shared with me prior to this show, I would struggle to argue with that wisdom. His medical worldview is, though, shared with a relatively small but vociferous part of our community. For legal reasons, I have had to remove the names of some people referred to by Mr. Heading in this interview. It is obvious where I have done this. Whereas Manx Radio has no wish to restrict people from raising particular issues, Manx Radio also has a duty and indeed clear policy not to allow people to use Manx Radio broadcasts to make libelous statements or to defame people's character. I've recently had COVID, but Courtenay began by telling me it doesn't exist.
No, based on science, it's not a real thing, because I'm looking for evidence. So firstly, you've mentioned a virus, and I've got an affidavit here from the leading collector of freedom of information requests around the world, a lady called Christine Ann of the family Massey from Canada. She's asked 211 health institutes across 40 countries, show us the evidence of an isolated, purified, whole genome SARS-CoV-2 from a man, woman or animal. That's the definition. It must not be grown on monkey kidney cells, and to produce it, it must not have artefacts which are triggered as a result of antibiotics and starving those green monkey cells. So when someone says virus, not one virus has been proven in history to come without it being grown, when we look at the method statement, to find a virus, to characterise that virus. There's 211 health institutes, and this 14-page affidavit, thumbprinted by Christine Ann of the family Massey, I should say, yesterday in Toronto. 14 pages, which I shall leave with you. And yet,
you know, I wouldn't claim to be an expert biochemist, but when I was relatively young and looking a lot darker than I do these days, I attended the University of Liverpool and did a degree in biochemistry, and all the theories and science behind viruses were very clearly explained to me during my biochemistry and pharmacology courses. And yet you claim that there are no viruses. Is that what you're saying?
The claim is we've asked for evidence of it, and those people who make unusual, bold claims need to provide evidence. And so far, as of the 18th of February 2021, the Isle of Man government cannot and has not produced a Freedom of Information reply to Stephen William Gardner on the 18th of February 2021. So anyone who claims there is a virus, we simply say, show us the evidence. So that's the first thing you mentioned. You mentioned that you had a test. There is not a test for COVID. So the test that is generally used, let's start with the PCR. It's an amplification tool. It's been used for billions of tests around the world that weren't tests. They use an amplification cycle because they can't grow this particle naturally, so they have to multiply up the resulting soup, and they multiply that up with primers and additives and all sorts of strange materials, and you can literally, if you multiply this up by doubling and doubling again to try and find that sample. Kerry Mullis, the individual who actually was the guy behind the technique of multiplying up products for the PCR, said it's not a test. It can find anything in anything, was his actual quote. So when we have people here claiming the PCR test on committees with the Isle of Man is a test, that is fraud. That's the word.
So, I am struggling a little bit with, PCR test isn't necessarily the one that we're talking about, in as much as I took a lateral flow test. I know what happened. I know that the first day that I took the test, it was very clear that I had 2 red lines on this test. I had taken tests during the whole of the time of COVID and never actually had anything other than the control red line. So why would it be that I started to feel really ill and I ended up having 2 red lines for the first time in all the time I've been trying this, and then shortly afterwards my wife had the same thing? Why should that be? Surely that's more than a coincidence.
A location-specific disease is the same reason that for 100 years, best part of 1 million sailors died because they all caught scurvy. They lacked vitamin C. They were in the same location. The same contagion we must look at with Chernobyl and Hiroshima. They were not contagious diseases. They were location-specific events, and people wrongly attributed their outfection in the same location as having the same cause. And so the understanding of contagion, we'd have to read The Contagion Myth by Tom Cowan to understand you don't catch anything. You resonate, you're an electromechanical being, and you only have apparent contagions in Wuhan when they turn on 10,000 5G base stations.
Why would, first of all, in relation to 5G or even 4G, we live in a place where there is no mobile signal, so we don't have any of that. But that's parking that for now. Yep. I mean, you mentioned a public figure who spent years and years and years studying and becoming an expert in their field. And yet, I mean, I don't know. Have you got any medical qualifications?
I've got no medical qualifications, so I would cite as medical experts others that have doctor qualifications. So I'm lacking. I have 1 O-level in maths, so I have zero medical qualifications. So I wouldn't be as qualified as Harold Shipman. I wouldn't be as qualified as Dr. Crippen. I wouldn't be as qualified as Dr. Mengele, nor as qualified as
public figures. And that's a very brutal statement that you just made there. You've effectively compared 3 people who are known to be criminals, one an absolute war criminal, with a public figure who has no such charges levelled at him by anyone that I'm aware of.
I've simply made the qualification statement, and you have made in your own mind the jump, just as you have about infection and virus and testing, with no scientific evidence when we scrutinise it to support you. So when we have people in Manx committees making bold claims and claiming there is a whole genome and there is a variant, a virus, a B.1.1.7 Omicron UK variant,
a public figure
has not shown a whole sequence genome, nor can she. That is my claim against what is, I believe, quite clearly, Courtenay Adam Lawrence said, this is fraudulent activity, financially driven in the oldest parliament on the planet. So the information she had came from a GenBank sequence where they cobbled together bits and pieces and created an in silico genome.
I mean, you say there that this was financially driven by Tynwald. Tynwald had absolutely no financial interest in making the island or locking down the island for several months at a time. We lost substantial amounts of income from the general economy, and also substantial amounts were spent by Tynwald in way of payouts to try and help the economy survive. So it's quite an extraordinary thing to claim that there was some financial reason why all this stuff would be made up, because it seems to me anyway that quite the opposite is the case.
The currency reset under cover of COVID was covered in my first book. So when we look at From Health Heretic to Common Law Advocate, that was the clue in March 2020. Then in December 2020, I wrote The COVID Con A Wake. And so I highlighted some of the issues, and the issues around the money that drives this, the World Economic Forum model that drives this, is a currency reset for the bankruptcy that's besetting the world. GPs here and many other people made lots and lots of money. There are COVID billionaires from this narrative.
But not on the Isle of Man.
From this agenda. The whole financial inducements, when we look behind the curtain, I think we'll find there's enormous amounts of money, and the script that we're given allows no discussion of the narrative. No GP, and we could even say with the chemical treatments they are taught from 1920, when effectively the Rockefeller Institution took over the financing and the promulgation of chemical-based toxins going into the body, and GPs do not have 4 hours looking at food and wellness on their teaching. They are schooled, not educated. I've previously, when I used to be daft enough to go to a doctor, I did go, and 8.5 years ago he said I went there to get my blood tested to sign up, haven't been back since. Despite having a punctured lung in January, I avoid hospitals like the plague, come on to the plague, and that process said that my cholesterol was rather high. I'm a 10 times parish finisher because I eat a high-fat diet. I've walked 100 miles in a day 3 years ago. So if I ignore everything and know that with low cholesterol you die earlier, so when you then look at breast screening, unscreened countries, the women live longer. They've done that real-world test in Denmark, Sweden and Canada, and it is lunacy to screen women for breast cancer when the issues around their energetic body, their toxified body with carbs, with alcohol, with meds and chemicals. We don't look at the root causes of any of this. And to inject toxins into anyone, man, woman or animal, and I include animals, is a fallacy that is a 200-year mistake.
I noticed that you've neatly sidestepped the point which you were, or the question I was asking you, which was in relation to the financial incentive for Tynwald to make these decisions. I mean, there's no obvious financial incentive that I can think of. Now, I do accept that if your view is correct and that there is this sort of general conspiracy of almost every scientist that's ever studied medicine, that in some way that this is a big medicinal con of some sort, which seems to be what you're suggesting, then I can understand maybe that the Isle of Man isn't big enough to have developed its own system of medicine. It would have to copy others. But there is no, I mean, if we could just try and remain very, very tight and specific on this.
Let's focus on that.
There is no financial incentive for Tynwald to actually do this.
Okay, let's do this another way. We're currently in, and I'm very grateful for this interview, this will be the first national broadcaster that's taken this topic on in the world. We can come on to midazolam, we can come on to remdesivir, but let's start on the money that Manx Radio gets. £20,000 a week public subsidy. Used to be moaned about by Ron Berry when he owned 3FM, and 10 years ago I knew these people. So I hope this interview goes out unredacted. And so when I've been in front of people, and I won't repeat the word that Stu Peters said, he said I can't come on his show to talk about statins, probably 5 years ago now, in case I dropped him in the brown and smelly stuff. So that's blocked out. I had then an interview.
But you are on the show now.
Oh, so 5 years on, brilliant. Phil, because we are seeing MHKs, MLCs who've been willfully, criminally poisoned with the toxins that are in those jabs. They include hydrogels, self-assembly nanoparticles, parasites, and so I only left you with a 53-page document earlier. I'll give you some 150-page documents that say what's actually in the jab. But let's go back to the money. So the script that is handed down comes very centrally from the World Economic Forum. It has some massive agendas behind it, which most people would rather watch Man United play at home. They know none of them what's in a vaccine. I used to know what's in a vaccine. I will happily debate with every GP here who's made, I believe, money from COVID. That is my claim. And so we'd like a public meeting where they don't walk out, because the last time I was asked, which was the 4th of April 2019, to present to all island GPs, 47 of them were there, 15 of them walked out when they could not answer my questions on the causes of polio. They have such a religion of poisoning young babies with jabs, toxic aluminium, mercury, formaldehyde, nanoparticles, graphene oxide, and neurodegenerative chemicals, proven carcinogenic chemicals, that 15 walked out. So those people who didn't realise that polio is caused by DDT, nobody I debate this with can debate it. Smallpox, we look at the Qatar incident. So driven by money, those bad batches, those toxic lots were sent around the world in the Qatar incident. Unfortunately, we're now able to find the batches that were the hot lots that were sent around the world, and they are the most toxic lots that were sent to every US state. And so once we track down the batches the lots and get them in the lab work from Robin Wakeling in New Zealand, the South Africans, the Germans, the Austrians, the Canadians who've used light field and dark field microscopes. What is in these vaccines? I've said to Beth Espy, we will all weep together.
OK, most of what you've just said there is refuted by medical science. It's extraordinary the sorts of things that you're saying. I've looked, and we'll return to this because I think it needs further exploration. Suffice to say that everything you've said is challenged by mainstream medicine, of which the scientists number the most significant part. I mean, it's well over 95% of scientists are agreed that conventional medicine is correct. One thing, though, that I think most scientists would agree with you on is this general view about wellness. And actually, we've perhaps focused far too much on medicinal treatments and not really anywhere near enough in relation to diet and general well-being and the general way in which lives are lived. I mean, that's a real winning point that you have there. You developed the Derby Wellness Centre, didn't you?
I tried to. They wouldn't let me have the medical centre because they have too much money in a sick treatment model. It's £350 million a year of sickness here. Those of us who don't go to the doctor, my wife is, dare I say her age, she's 69. She's not been for 10 years, has a leg problem at the moment, which we'll sort out. I haven't been for 8.5 years, and I only then went to get the blood tested. So if you continue to eat carbs, you will get diabetes. If you continue to inject young boys and girls at 14, you will get diabetes. We simply don't understand the body. Wellness begins on the end of a fork. And to say that consensus science that has trillion-dollar industries, people have made tens of billions on the COVID jab. I want to have these MHKs. We can start with
public figures.
We will have a public debate, I hope, in Ramsey under penalty of perjury, and they will be able to produce no evidence.
That's a matter for you and them, but you have an opportunity, and we've only got under 7 minutes left. So perhaps if we could just talk a little bit more about the whole concept of wellness. I mean, effectively, you're talking about championing evidence-based health restoration. How can people effectively avoid having to go to the doctor in the method that you
in my view, I'm 65-year-old coffin dodger. Eat well, get clean water, ban glyphosate. There's a Stephanie Seneff study, 31-page. Ban glyphosate, we shouldn't use it to scorch the earth on the Isle of Man. Totally toxic. My Derby Wellness blogs were done between 2016 and 2019. All they are is about wellness. They will highlight that if you want to make people ill, breast screen them. If you want to make people ill, do the prostate test. And that test has come into the light recently because people don't understand the Great Prostate Hoax book was written by Richard Ablin, the inventor of the PSA test. So it was in spending, I think, 30,000 hours minimum looking at breast screening, antidepressants, toxins. So if you want to know how to be well, do not inject young babies with anything. That toxin is the thing the body can't chelate. So the outfection is people having multiple jabs, and Pfizer have just had to come clean under criminal penalty to say it wasn't tested for transmission. It was tested on 8 mice, the booster. So if you want to keep doing the jab sickness chemical model, founded by the pharmaceutical industry, the chemical industry, and the beginnings of Bayer Monsanto was IG Farben. So these industries have enormous money, and there's £20,000 a week goes to Manx Radio not to allow people like me on and debate me.
I would argue that that's not the case, because here you are, and you will be on. You're on Manx Radio, and you're getting the opportunity to put your case, and it's up to others to decide whether they agree or whether they believe that actually that you're talking a load of nonsense. And it would be fair to say that if you look at all the various sources that you vast amount of criticism of pretty much everyone that you quote from conventional medicine. I memean, for example, one of the professors which I watched and thought was a very excellent lecture given by Professor Chris Exley. I'm sure if you Google Chris Exley, you'll find it, aluminium adjuvants. And yet, Professor Andrew Pollard, chair of Oxford Vaccine Group, says the study that Professor Exley uses was bad science. Others say Keele University, which is where Professor Exley was based, says the university emphatically supports public health vaccination programmes and recognises the importance and current vaccines play in protecting health both in the UK and globally. And indeed, Professor Exley himself said, "I'm not anti-vaccination." So even your champion isn't quite as extreme as you on this.
I've studied more. He thought there wasn't any evidence of ME. The 53-page paper I gave you this morning, Chris Exley emailed me. He didn't know of it. He doesn't know things outside his silo. The Oxford Vaccine Group is a criminal, fraudulent, as is the Keele University Vice-Chancellor.
Manx Radio could find no evidence to back up these extraordinary opinions expressed by Courtenay, and indeed the overwhelming weight of medical science would very strongly suggest otherwise.
So I make these statements under penalty of perjury with no protection. So when you cite the majority, you forget that science is search. It's not democracy. 100 years of scurvy ships, pellagra, berry, because people hadn't got the wherewithal to actually research what causes these hotspots. Toxins in Lombardy, the ventilators murdering people in New York, remdesivir ventilator deaths on the Isle of Man, midazolam murder at Abbotswood, 20 deaths. Nobody has produced any evidence of a virus. It is heartbreaking to watch these people, having been 6 years unpaid and having 9 years ago being a healthcare innovation advisor to the Isle of Man government. The people who are ill are giving advice to people who are well. They're saying they can penetrate our body, but no one stands between us and the Creator. When you look at the legal money involved, there is not a chance in hell that we'll have a full investigation by Mark Newey, the detective inspector at Abbotswood.
Again, Courtenay makes some extraordinary claims here, suggestions of murder and also suggesting that the police won't thoroughly investigate the deaths that happened at Abbotswood. Manx Radio found no evidence to back up any of these extraordinary claims by Courtenay.
This is what the people will champion around the world. A Nuremberg trial is starting in Australia in January. And these escapes of the harms with the 1,000 people that, dare I say, you disrespect, the 1,012 people as of April this year who were notified to the MHRA being injured from the COVID jab. Every week I meet people on Ramsey Parliament Square who've been jab harmed. Young Dita last week had seizures. A 21-year-old working for one of the car dealerships here. 2 deaths notified at the weekend. 1,000 people injured. My friend from Accelerated Cancers. My other friend from Port Erin who was ventilated to death in April 2020 with his lungs full of COVID. There's no such proven disease.
And we are giving you the opportunity, so I think it's a little harsh to criticise me for doing that. There are, though, several hundred people on the Isle of Man who have long COVID. They are convinced that they have long COVID. You may say otherwise. Sadly, we are approaching the end of the programme now. We've only got a few minutes left. Is this going to be one of those where you will continue to have your campaigns and the rest of the world will effectively pat you on the head and say, well, actually, this man has lost the plot?
The 6 people that have said that same sort of accusation, I wasn't a little harsh to you. I was simply saying that on the basis of evidence, I've given you a 53-page report which you should study for family reasons. So I know that from my good note-keeping. So the basis of people patting me on the head with long COVID, there were 20 different symptoms of AIDS. There was no HIV virus ever proven in history. You need to read Inventing the AIDS Virus by Peter Duesberg and Forward by Kerry Mullis. So the test is not a real test, never validated. I would like these fraudulent people,
public figures,
to face me in an open court, on camera, no legalers, no representation, just simply the good doctors in truth, so that we don't have the slur put on the Isle of Man that we have a Dr. Mengele type regime here. Do your own research is what I'd say in my closing statement.
That was anti-vax protester, researcher and campaigner Courtenay Heading. His allegations about our healthcare system are challenged by the overwhelming majority of scientists and doctors who have dedicated their lives to improving your health. I gave the opportunity to those criticised by Courtenay to comment on the programme, but they chose not to. Let me know what you thought of this programme by contacting Phil Gawne at manxradio.com and get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. For now though, I'm Phil Gawne, Goromayo, thanks for listening.